everyone and welcome. My name's Natasha Crump. I'm the Environment, Social and Governance Director for the Amoria Bond Group, and genuinely it's a pleasure for me to be welcoming you all today as your host on International Women's Day 2021 for our first ever Ascend Live panel event. I'm joined today by a fabulous panel, all of whom bring a really unique and different perspective to the table today for what's set to be a really inspiring and insightful session. And the intention is that it's packed full of practical takeaways. Before I introduce our guest properly, I'm just going to quickly run through a few house rules for the day or for the morning and just briefly give you an overview of what we're going to cover so you know what to expect from the next 30-40 minutes or so. Joining me this morning is my co-host, Leah Brown. Leah is the Amoria Bond Group Learning and Development Manager, and she'll be monitoring the chat box, for your questions and comments as we go through the session. We do want this to be as interactive as possible so that everyone gets maximum value from the session today. And we will try and get through as many questions as we can during the live session. If we don't get to your question though, don't worry, we're going to be putting together a Q&A insights following on from the session, which will be available through the Amoria Bond website at some point later on this week. We're also going to be recording this session. So Matt, if you haven't pressed record, if I could ask that you start recording the session now. And we'll be putting a replay of the event on the Amoria Bond webinar section of our website before close of play today. So if you want to revisit the content or you've got colleagues who you would like to share the content with, then please feel free to do so. If anyone would like a copy of the Q&A insights sending to you directly, please let us know in the chat box during the event or just direct message me on LinkedIn and I'll arrange for a copy to be sent to you once that's produced later on today. If I could just ask that everyone keeps themselves on mute for the duration of the session, just so that we don't get distractions for our guests and for other attendees, that would be brilliant. So we're here today for an Ascend live session, but what is Ascend? Ascend's an internal group-wide initiative within Amoria Bond, which I have to say I'm incredibly proud to have helped co-found along with some fantastic colleagues, including Leah, in the summer last year. So in July 2020, we set up Ascend with the very clear goal of attracting, retaining and progressing more females within our own business and across the STEM sectors we operate in. It's no secret that women are significantly underrepresented across most STEM sectors and businesses, and it's a challenge we recognise ourselves within the recruitment and staffing industry. But what's really exciting now, though, is that we're seeing generally a shift away from talking about the business case for change and the benefits of proportionate gender diversity in STEM. The evidence is overwhelming that gender diverse businesses are more innovative, creative, productive, and profitable. And happily, the conversation is largely now moving to focus more on how businesses can achieve that gender balance. And that's why we're here today, because whilst most STEM businesses we work with recognise and embrace the need and case for change, in reality, only relatively few companies are actually successfully achieving their objectives and ambitions in this space. So our goal for today is to provide everybody with some positive, practical insights and tangible steps that we can all make to accelerate greater gender balance in STEM. We hope everyone will take away at least one thing we can do differently from today and choose to challenge on International Women's Day. So without further ado, I'm going to ask our panel guests to introduce themselves and get the discussion going. Katie, if I can come to you first.
Sure. Thanks so much for inviting me to this topic today. It's very close to my heart. I love doing things for International Women's Day. My background is recruitment. I've spent the last 20 years in the recruitment industry. The last 15 years have been specifically within the very heavily male-dominated sector in energy. And I guess my interest in diversity and inclusion came about around 4 years ago when I set up my own business, Eva Connections / Eva Talent. So here I was involved in coaching lots of women in their careers. And here I really felt that there was a huge gap and discrepancy between women's confidence and what their skills and what they can add value into an organization But also on the other end of the spectrum, I also wanted to help organisations with their diversity and inclusion recruitment, because it's such an important topic, and companies have a great intention, but often are unsure in terms of how they go about finding more women, keeping more women, empowering more women, etc. So that's what I've been doing for the last 4 years, and hope to continue on this journey.
Thanks, Katie. Felicity, if you'd like to just introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Felicity Wingrove. I'm a psycholinguist. So for the last 25 years, I've specialised in the applied psychology of language to create a deliberate emotional connection. I run my own PR and content agency, and I specialise in working with CEOs and C-suite executives, primarily across Europe. I have some clients globally, helping them to stand most authentically in their power. So my background is psycholinguistics, it's behavioural psychology, touching on social and evolutionary psychology as well. It's all around deliberate, reliable emotional connection, and allowing women to stand in their power. I have the pleasure of working with some really fantastic female leaders who have needed some support to really firmly establish themselves, and perhaps to unpick some of the narrative that they've learned over the early kind of years of their career.
Fabulous, thanks Felicity. And Amy, last but by no means least.
Hi, thank you, Natasha. Yes, so my name is Amy Steele, and I'm here representing Coalesce Management Consulting. We are a STEM consulting business providing technical and engineering project services. So I look after the engineering and renewable energy team for Europe and North America, which, as Katie mentioned, are two very male-dominated industries. I've actually been working in the engineering sector for just over 9 years. So initially providing recruitment services, before moving into the consultancy side of the sector. When I was recruiting, I recognised quite quickly that there was a real gap for female talent, and despite many of my clients' best efforts to create a more gender diverse workforce, as their supplier, it was really clear that they needed more females for those roles. So I used to really work hard to try and help them do that. In 2018, I was invited to speak at a TED Talks event at the University of Manchester to help create awareness and encourage more females to join the STEM sector. And now working for an engineering company directly myself, I work closely with the females in our business to help progress and empower them in the workplace. Gender diversity is just so important to both myself and our business. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here on the panel today to represent an engineering company.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Thanks very much to all of you for joining us this morning. So let's get stuck in. I want to start the discussion at the beginning, really, by exploring with you what companies can do to differentiate themselves, to attract the female talent that they need for their businesses to thrive and succeed. And I'm being really very deliberate in my language here, because what we're talking about isn't just about attracting more women applicants to tick a box, but the specific skills and experience a company needs. So Felicity, if I may, I'm going to come to you first on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what the majority of individuals and businesses don't recognise is that we all run our own filters. So one of the phrases that I use with clients is that your truth is not the truth. And it's really important that we understand that we are coming from a patriarchal paradigm. So everything in business is set up for the ease and the comfort of the masculine. And that does not automatically reflect well when you are looking to attract and retain and nurture and grow the next generation of women that you want to come through to help drive your business forward. So it's actually bringing in awareness to the filters that are being run, the language that you're using to describe your business, to describe a role itself, the way in which you are structuring the very job that you're looking at putting out, that you're looking at attracting women into. they need to be able to see themselves in the role. They also need to be able to see that the whole show not tell. They need to be able to see that there are mentors. There are women who have trodden that path before. I've used, again, the analogy before that there might be a narrow path, but we as women now, right now, we are treading a path, and we should be leaving a much wider wake behind us. And in that wake, the next generation of women can come through, and they can do the same. From the business perspective, I think they just need to be very aware. Keep that mantra, the truth. Your truth is not the truth. Keep that mantra in mind. Recognize the fact that there are biases, unconscious biases, no doubt, but biases that are going to prevent women from seeing themselves potentially in that role. And consider the language. A number of research studies have been done in recent years looking at the literal interpretation of certain phraseology. Women are very much more likely to only see themselves in a role when they are 90 to 95% fit for the descriptives. Men are much more likely to see themselves in a role when they're around a 75% fit. So what you can do is you can use slightly more vague or more general language, or you can talk about the output or outcome that you're looking for. That's really important. So you may not specify a particular qualification. You might specify a skill set that you would want that person to show, for example. It's just being aware, being deliberate in your language choice, and keeping that artfully vague, as the wonderful Milton Erickson always referred to it.
Really interesting, and I think you hit on something there in terms of the authenticity that companies need to be thinking about when they're representing their brand externally. Amy, coming to you on the same point, what have you seen work best at a practical level for companies who want to attract more female professionals?
Yeah, quite a few things really, and stuff that's really easy to implement as well that will have an immediate impact. And it's stuff that might sound really obvious and basic, but actually it can make a really, really big difference. So for example, case studying the females who are already in the business. So having them feature on the website, use them through marketing campaigns, have them as a bit of a face of the company as well. Because what that does is it creates familiarity with females who are potentially looking to join the company or within the sector. And it also helps showcase them as role models in the industry as well. And when you can see that there's other females in a business and that's visible, as a female, I think you would be more inclined to apply, because you're going to an environment where you can have a peer group quite quickly and there are other females in the business. I think as well, breaking the stereotype of engineering being very male dominated. We know it still is, but there clearly is an agenda and an objective for that to change. And one of the best ways to do that is to create awareness by just simply talking about it. So doing events like this, inviting industry contacts to network and meet each other, that actually allows for that progression and for more females to meet other females in the sector, in the industry, and explore new companies. And I think finally, and I alluded to it a little bit in my intro, making sure that you're working with suppliers who have the same D&I agenda as you. Because if everybody is pulling in the same direction, everybody has the same objective of trying to get more females into the company, and that filters through the supply chain, it's effectively like lots and lots of marginal gains all working in the same way. And if that takes a priority for you and your supplier and their supplier, then ultimately it will have an impact and it will attract more females to all parts of the cycle. I would be quite interested as well just to hear from Katie on this, because as someone who runs a business specifically focusing on this area, is there anything else that we could do as a company to try and attract more females that we maybe not doing already?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, a lot of the time companies really need to think outside of the box when it comes to sourcing talent, because everybody tends to fish from the same ponds and they're all fighting for the same talent. So you often find people are being recycled around the same companies over and over again. However, in order to bring that fresh talent in, innovation, creativity, differences of thought, then people should look outside of the company, should look outside of their own industry sectors. So I do a lot of work within the energy sector, and I often advise clients to look, if they're, for example, they're a renewable energy company, then they can look into oil and gas organisations or pharmaceutical or other big heavy engineering where the technologies are similar, but then you're bringing in different skill sets, you're bringing in new skills, and you're widening that talent pool. And then also think about, you know, if we're looking for more females, look at the hidden talent pools, such as women who are looking to return back to the work environment. You know, there's often a huge demographic of women who have taken time off to have children, or looking after elderly parents, or any other reasons why they've not been in work for a number of years. And these talent pools are often overlooked, but these are people who are super motivated, have fantastic skills, and are really looking to go back into the workforce. And also dependent on location, expat spouses. There's often a misperception that expat spouses don't want to work, when in actual fact they really do. And they're often as qualified, if not more qualified, than the partner who secured the work. So it's just thinking about things in a different way. And I think one of my favourite sayings of all time is, the definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over and again and expecting to get a different result. You know, companies need to think differently in order to be different. So
yeah, it's really interesting stuff there. So the key takeaways that I've picked up from the three of you there really are that point about authenticity, the point about women needing to be able to see themselves and see a role for themselves, and have access up front to role models and what's possible within a business. And a really key point you put there as well, Katie, around that fishing from a different pool. That's such an important thing for just from the diversity conversations generally. It's a really, really important point to make, and to think about that, the opportunities for considering different types of applicants as well, from different industries and maybe different backgrounds that you've maybe not considered previously. Thanks for that. Attracting female applicants is a great starting point, but it's not going to be enough on its own for us to progress the dial here. What else, a practical level then, and Katie, I'm going to come to you first because I think it leads on nicely from what you were already talking about there. What else can companies do to level the playing field for women in the hiring and selection process?
Yeah, there are lots of different ways that this can be undertaken, and what we've got to bear in mind is there are lots of different types of biases that can creep in at the very start of the process. So if you think about when you're reviewing CVs right through to inviting somebody in for an interview, there are numerous ways that we can try to minimize the bias, such as if you think about the information you collect on a CV, such as age or hobbies, or even a photo on a CV can put people off inviting people for interview. Your education, your gender, your colour, your religion, you know, all of this information at the beginning will affect your judgment, because you will make numerous assumptions just on this information alone before the candidates even got to interview stage. So using various proofing tools to minimise that bias will definitely help. So trying to make your process as anonymous as possible in order to reduce the bias, because what you're looking to do is select the best candidates for the position, and we're looking to select the best candidates based on experience, knowledge and motivation. And then when we think about the interview process, if you think about the hiring managers, how are we educating hiring managers to deal with their own biases in their moments? Have they gone through some training with regards to unconscious bias? Are they aware of it? You know, I think a lot of people are aware of the similar to me bias, where we tend to like people who are similar to us. And this is a real huge problem when it comes to selecting people for interview and offering them the job, because we tend to like people who maybe have gone to the same school or who support the same football team. And this is all unconscious, but we have a certain affinity to them. So, and you know, there's huge biases around names. So people with ethnic sounding names have to send out 50% more applications than somebody with a white sounding name in order to get an interview. So then when we get to the interview, it's important to try and remove bias from the interview, because if we think about the first kind of 2 seconds within that interview process, such as eye contact, handshaking, Is somebody an introvert or an extrovert? We bake that into our judgment. So trying to put interviews, you know, as late as possible in the process as possible, and measure things that are connected to the position in order to reduce bias in the interview, in the recruitment process. So think about what we need to find out about the individual for the role, and how do we measure it? So think about the different tasks, think about the projects. What can we ask somebody in an interview in order to test their knowledge? How can we ask them how they would approach different tasks as part of the recruitment process? So, for example, you might ask somebody who's going through a customer service position a very different situational based question than somebody who would be going for, say, a software development role. So use situational based interviews, interview based questions, and define the answers that what we're looking for prior to the interview. So think about what is a good answer, what is a bad answer. Otherwise, we'll still get stuck in our own biases. And we really need to train all of our interviewees in exactly the same way as well. So having panel interviews, opening it up to other departments in order to expand that interview panel out, give opportunities for people in junior roles into the interview screening process, and use real live examples of, for example, job situations. So use them as your questions to test the behaviours on the job, because it's very important that we need to test behaviours and skills and knowledge as opposed to whether we like somebody or not. So education right along from the very first stage, from reviewing CVs right through the interview process to offer stages is, you know, super important when it comes to this topic.
And Katie, just before we move on, great comprehensive answer there, but we'll have seen over recent days there's been quite a lot of coverage around whether there's value in unconscious bias training, and I'm just interested to hear how you think unconscious bias training kind of fits into this process.
Yeah, and it's a valid point, because training alone won't stop biases creeping in. You know, there are huge systemic and cultural changes that go back hundreds of years that are ingrained in society and social norms. However, the key point around the unconscious bias is really around raising awareness around your own biases so that you can catch them and be aware of them before they impact your judgment and decisions. You know, moving the needle towards diversity and inclusion in all forms is a huge work in progress. Mm. And the mere fact that diversity and inclusion now is a hot topic is a very good step in the right direction. But unconscious bias training is a very, very small part of the whole equation. Mm. And it's very important to be aware of it, but often it's forgotten because it's so unconscious. So it's just keeping on top of all of the other initiatives around diversity and inclusion that organisations can implement, such as employee resource groups across, you know, females or different ethnicities, psychological safety for women in organisations, looking at companies' values and culture. It's such a huge topic that the unconscious bias training is more of an awareness tool, but something that should be continued time and time again and used as a, you know, training tool for managers so that they understand their own biases, but it's not going to eliminate it for sure.
Sure. And Amy, I'm going to come to you now, because just leading on nicely from what Katie set up there, from a practical perspective, what real life examples then have you seen of initiatives that have actually really worked to help reduce gender bias?
Yeah, so it was actually really interesting listening to Katie run through a lot of the theory there, because there's quite a lot of stuff that resonated with me that I've either seen or experienced. So it's actually really interesting to hear the sort of the theory behind it all. So thank you for sharing all that, Katie. And some of the stuff that Katie mentioned, I think we're doing quite well. So for example, we really do try to involve more women in our interviews and create a more diverse panel, so other departments, other teams, and it gives the person coming in for the interview more of a feel for the business and the people they'll be working with. But also we do make a conscious effort, if we have a female coming in for an interview, that they do meet another female as part of that process as well. Something that we actually looked at last year as well, we went through our interview process completely and dissected it, and improved it. And one of the big changes that we actually made was changing some of the language to become more gender neutral, because we recognised when we went through that process that a lot of it was very male-led language, completely unconsciously. So we made those changes, and I do think it's having a positive impact, because we have gone on to hire quite a few more females over the last 3 or 4 months since making those changes. And I think part of that is down to the interview process. And, you know, another thing that we're doing that I think is quite unique is we're asking some of the senior females in the company to film a short video pre-interview. So once somebody has applied for a job, we're then sending them a mini sort of 3 or 4 minute video introducing the female, their role within the business, why they work there, what they like about it. It's a little bit unique, so hopefully it gives us an advantage in the marketplace, full stop. It's not just the females we've asked to do it, it's the senior members of the team, full stop. But actually what that means is it's a more dynamic approach, but it's more welcoming. So, you know, we're hoping that the outcome of that, and it's something we've launched very recently, is that more females feel comfortable coming into the office for the interview or over Zoom, knowing that there are other females there, you know, back to what I was saying earlier about there being role models. And I just think that sense of familiarity just really, really helps with that process. And I think finally, it's really important for companies to just be honest about the reality of the situation with their, you know, the gender diversity within their business. If you are a very male-dominated company, that's okay. You can't pretend to be something you're not. You know, the fact that you're trying to do something about it is actually a really, really positive thing. So if you're interviewing a female and you know that you've maybe only got 1 or 2 of the females, let them know that, because if they come on board and it's a key agenda for you, it's a priority, they can help shape your objective of trying to become more diverse and play an active role in that. And that in itself will not only attract more females, but it will retain the females that you've got more effectively as well. And I think anyone joining a company, knowing they can play a huge part in a company's journey in whatever format it may be, is actually something that's really, really attractive for any future employee. So yeah, just be really honest about the exact situation when you're talking to people.
Yeah, Amy, if I may, it's really interesting that you say that, because I think it resonates a lot for me, and I'm sure it will do for Natasha as well, and our experience with Amoria Bond, and certainly from that position of being honest with new female starters about, I guess, where we are at in our journey, but also what we're doing to level the playing field. And what I think it really gets to the heart of is why it is we've started the Ascend initiative. I think because if we look at some of the offices and some of the different functions within the organisation, while some of them benefit so much from having more female leaders and role models, there are others which have almost entirely male leadership teams, in particular one of our European recruitment teams. But through Ascend, we've been able to provide all women across the business, regardless of their role, of their tenure and of their location, access to a female role model within the business. And that's someone that they can meet virtually to build meaningful connections, to share experiences and to share resources with as well. And I think the impact of doing this, of launching Ascend in this way, has been quite incredible, and it's been really fast as well. So I think since we started Ascend, we've appointed another female to the board. We've had an equal number of female promotions as male promotions over the last year. And for the last quarter, but for quarter 1 of 2021, we actually achieved a 50 to 50 male to female hiring ratio, which in our industry is really something to be proud of. So I think now the aim with Ascend is certainly to help empower those females that we've hired and that we have within the organisation to really reach their full potential and progress into more senior leadership roles within the business.
Absolutely, Leah. And I know we're joined by quite a few of our fellow Ascenders this morning. So any comments and feedback from you all would be really welcome as we progress through the session today. Thanks for that. Felicity, in your work with STEM companies, what have you seen work best again, at a practical level, this is all about tangible, practical insights to move the dial for women to help them thrive and progress?
Brilliant question. The STEM businesses that I've worked with who have achieved the most have actually put a very conscious and deliberate focus on empowering the women that are working with them. And that's at all levels. We're not just looking at the kind of board level C-suite. So by empowering, what I mean is conscious training to enable women to bring, particularly women, I mean, most of these STEM businesses will do this across the board, but to bring awareness to our own communication preferences and awareness to the communication preferences of the people that we're dealing with. So if you want to stand in your power and be your most compelling, your most authentic, your most convincing self, you need to understand the baggage that you're bringing with you, and you need to understand the filters that someone else is going to be running. So we talk about unconscious bias. Unconscious bias is essentially a collection of something called meta programs. We've got about 600 meta programs running, and they're all little belief systems. They're on a simple matrix. You're somewhere between 0 and 100, and you've got a binary choice of each of these. They're essentially computer programs for our brain, and they help us make decisions. Businesses that help their employees to understand what their meta programs are and how they can either leave them to one side during a conversation, communication, presentation, work day, or how best to take those on board and use them as almost ammunition to skyrocket their career. There are lots of things that women do that men don't, and we need to be very conscious of this. This is not all women, in the same way as it's not all men. You know, we're talking very generally here, but women are much more likely to apologize. They tend to be much worse at taking authoritative pauses and owning what they say, stopping when they're done. They tend to use more disempowering hand gestures, for example. One of the ones that I see an awful lot, there's an American family therapist called Virginia Satir who practiced in the 60s and 70s, and she learned that there were 5 core hand gestures that can create a deliberate emotional response, and that's the powerful part there. So by doing these, you can encourage the responses back to you. And there's one called the placator. I'm going to stand up now, so a slightly dodgy angle here, but what a lot of women will do as they're talking is they'll have their hands turned palm upwards. They might even bounce them. Usually it's around chest height, so it's not the most attractive thing, but they'll use this to punctuate the point as they're talking. And it's a supplicating gesture. It essentially says subconsciously, please like me, please don't challenge me, please don't disagree with me. It's a physical representation of lack of confidence, even if you're not necessarily feeling that. So businesses, particularly in STEM, who are working with very, very smart women, are teaching them how to remove these layers and these nuances of lack of confidence and replace them with much more empowering gestures instead.
Wow, I now don't know what to do with my hands, I'm going to be honest. It feels like a good moment to just stop. And Leah, I know we've got a lot of questions have been coming in and we are really quite tight on time. So if I can just ask you to pick out one quick question, just for, we've promised an interactive session. So
okay.
Let's go with one for now.
Okay, so this should be a nice quick one. Yeah, this is a good one. Are there any specific tools that Katie would recommend to help identify and minimize hiring bias?
Yeah, there's a lot of tools that companies can use, and there's a lot of tools out on the market now. For example, there's some proofing tools that organisations can use in order to identify gender biased language within their job descriptions. And there's web crawler software that trolls networking sites that gather data on job seekers from a range of sources to determine who meets the requirements for a role, allowing employees to find candidates beyond their usual talent pools. That's called, there's one called Entelo and Connectifier, but I can also send this to you if you're sending out some information via PDF, because there's quite a few. There's Unity and there's Text.io, which is used as which can be used on the job descriptions. And there's elements of gamification in the recruitment process that can encourage applications from candidates who would be discouraged from traditional recruitment processes by identifying core skills that engages applicants. So there's one called Picnic and Gamification Summit. And then there's some really great sites that you could use there's one called beapplied.com, which helps you remove bias from the full recruitment process. So a lot of your organizations and talent teams are using that. And then also when it comes to assessments, you've got to think about, because a lot of companies use assessments to assess candidates, and there's a variety of different ones. But what they often forget is, what are the measurements that they want to define? So really define what you want to measure first, and then decide on the tools that you want to go for. So define the different metrics that you want to measure. For example, I gave the example earlier, a customer service rep versus a programmer, there'll be different metrics to measure. But yeah, I can certainly send you a list of them, and you can add that into the webinar content.
We will do that. Thanks, Katie. Yeah, because I think having some specific tools that come recommended would be a really good thing to be able to share off the back of today. Yeah. Felicity, whilst Katie's been talking, I just wanted to circle back with you actually, because you hit on something in your earlier response about the way STEM businesses who are really committed to making change are kind of doing things like the training and the awareness around empowering through non-verbal communication, etc. And actually, it highlights the point that happily, we have lots of men working in STEM and across STEM who do want to create and work in inclusive workplaces where, regardless of our differences, regardless of gender, all colleagues have the same equity of opportunity to succeed and to progress. I'm really interested, Felicity, in understanding how men can be effective allies for their female colleagues.
You're absolutely right. There are some fantastic examples of men proactively and passionately following this sort of agenda. I think there's the most powerful way would be to bring awareness. It goes back to the point I made at the very beginning. Their truth is not the truth. It doesn't make it any less truthful, but it means that it's a facet. You know, the truth is a diamond, and they're looking at a single facet of it. So, for example, if we looked at something like minimal responses, so a minimal response is the verbal but non-word based sounds that you make when someone else is talking, the mm-hms and the ers and the yeses. Women and men use them to very different effect. Men will use them to agree with what someone's saying. Women use them to encourage someone, to support their right to speak or to continue speaking. It doesn't mean if I say to you, and at the end of your statement, conversation, comment, I say I wildly disagree, you're not shocked, but a man would be, because he would have felt that I was agreeing with him all the way through. Now, the responsibility is on me as a woman to clean up my language. So I wouldn't say yes, I might say, okay. Perhaps it's slightly less positive minimal responses. But actually for men to recognize that women have a very different inherent communication style. And if they're saying, as they're talking, they're not necessarily agreeing. It's little nuances like this, these small building blocks of communication that will prevent miscommunication and misunderstanding.
Wow, fascinating. Okay, I actually even noticed myself kind of nodding and holding back from going, as you were speaking. So clearly that's something I do naturally. Anyway, I'm going to really be keeping an eye out for that, Felicity. Thank you for that. Amy, I'm going to come to you now on the same point from, again, a more practical kind of side of the theory. In your experience, what have you seen work that you've seen in terms of STEM companies or men within STEM companies being truly true advocates, effective advocates for their female employees?
Yeah, so do you know what? I think actually it comes down to the day-to-day reality of the working practices as well. So I think there can still be a bit of a nervousness around communication with female employees in engineering businesses, because they are still the minority. And I think people still think about that old school gender bias of the STEM sector. But actually, it has come such a long way, both in technological advancement and intelligence. And gone are the days of that typical old school metal bashing factory where it's just all men and it's very practical labor-based work. It's such a progressive industry. The industry itself has come such a long way. And with that, the dynamics of the types of staff that these companies have as well, hence why there now are more females in the sector, and that's continuing to go in the right direction. And I think it's really important to remember that females are in the business because of their expertise, because of the skills that they have. So assumptions are still made, even with the best intention, to maybe communicate or act differently around them, when actually that doesn't necessarily need to be the case at all. There is still that potentially unconscious stereotyping, which, although improving, can be there. So I think really it just doesn't need to be there. Communicate in the same way, and treat women and men exactly the same, like any other employee. And I think to follow on from that, in terms of being an advocate for the company, recognizing that you're trying to increase the number of females in your business, and educating the wider business on that as well. Ultimately, if you look at all the statistics, you can read it anywhere online, that businesses with a more diverse workforce of any kind are the most successul, and that is proven. The stats are there. So if you can get both yourself, your wider company on board with that, you without a doubt will increase the diversity of your workforce naturally, because the intention is there, and as a result you will be a more successful company as well.
That's brilliantly put, Amy, and what a great way to come towards the end of our discussion there. Couple of key themes there coming through from yourself and Felicity. I want to pick up on, you mentioned about broad strokes and stereotyping, and just for me, the importance of not overgeneralizing women, and that there is massive diversity. Just like there's massive diversity between men, there's massive diversity between women. And I personally take real kind of front, really, when I hear overgeneralizations of women's preferences and, the way women like to be treated or that they behave within the workplace, because it is so very different. Look, I'm really very conscious of my hands right now. That's really, really hit there. If anyone's interested, and I'm sure most of you will be, in hearing more from Felicity about things like non-verbal communication. Felicity, you actually run a free Insights masterclass through LinkedIn, don't you?
Yeah.
We will again pop the details of that in the follow-up Insights Q&A. Officially, we've got 1 minute to go. I think I will risk overrunning by a couple of minutes, and just Leah, if we can take one more question before we wrap up.
Yeah, sure. It's a shame because we've had so many good ones, but this one really stood out to me. It's does Felicity have any other tips of things women should or shouldn't be doing with their hands or body language? It just feels very apt after what we last discussed. And for their male colleagues to be aware of too.
There's just so much, absolutely. I think the first one is to pause. There is such power in the pause. When you say what you've got to say, stop. Women, and again, I'm stepping into what Natasha was saying about the generalizing, but women have a tendency to reframe what they've just said, and it gives away your power. So when you've said stop, it doesn't have to be aggressive. You can nod gently. Be very conscious of your hands, so avoid the placator that I talked about before. But also sometimes women will try and show their confidence by going too much the other way, and there's another satire hand gesture called the blamer, and people will recognize it. It's called the Donald Trump nowadays. It's when you're actually using it and you're punctuating your point. There are ways, if you need to be really assertive, you can absolutely do that, but take it from Donald Trump into Barack Obama, and what he did was a finger and a thumb together, and he used it very much up in the air to punctuate a point. I guess what I would say is your communication style is not, it's very personal, it's unique to you. And if you can unpick that, you can put it back together again very deliberately, using the aspects and the elements that suit you and achieve the outcome or output that you're looking for. So craft your own communication style. Don't assume that you're just stuck with it. And look at areas perhaps that you're less strong, and look for support. So as Natasha said, there's all sorts of resources out there on the internet. I do some little 3-4 minute snippets for free over on LinkedIn. Just familiarize yourself, build that knowledge and expertise up.
Fantastic, thanks Felicity. Listen, apologies everyone, because we aren't going to get through more questions. I promise, I know that the panel have all got commitments straight after this event, so, and I did promise we'd finish on time. For those of you that are familiar with the usual internal ascend sessions, you know that timing is not my strong point, so I'm pretty proud of ourselves that we've managed to keep this pretty much on time today. Before I wrap up, I just want to pick out a few key things that as our guests have been talking, I've written down as, for me, the key takeaways. And it starts for me, I think, with recognizing and being aware of our biases, and then using that knowledge to think about what specifically we within our organisations need to be doing to address our specific challenges and the specific things that we need to address. And actually, a really key theme as well that's come through for me today has been about that authenticity and honesty, not pretending to be somewhere we're not yet, not pretending to be what we're not yet, but actually being really honest and bringing our colleagues along on the journey with us to make real practical change. And I think the final thing that's really come through for me as well, listening to these experts, these ladies sharing their knowledge and their insights, is the importance of asking for help, the importance of saying, I'm not quite sure how to do this. Who can help me? Who are the experts? Because there are lots of experts out there. And I'm going to do a bit of a shameless plug now. It wasn't intended at the beginning, but do check out the Amoria Bond podcasts. There's a brilliant one with Felicity. There's a brilliant one with Katie. It's called the Progressing Lives Everywhere podcast. You can either search for Progressing Lives Everywhere through any podcast platform, or go to our website, the Amoria Bond website, and you'll find the links there. But both Felicity and Katie and other guests like Dr. Joanna Rabeyi provide some fantastic insights that really speak to some of the themes that we've talked about today. And we actually interview some really great senior female women, CEOs, etc., and FTSE NEDs like Lisa Harrington and Madeleine Smith. So please do check that out. We really are over time. I've just undermined my timing here. But before we close, thank you so much, Felicity, Amy, and Katie, and thank you, Leah, for helping to co-host. I promise we will send out responses to the questions we weren't able to answer. Keep an eye on the website, give me a shout if you want those sending to you directly. And all that remains for me to say is thank you so much for joining us on International Women's Day. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.